Welcome to the new Kevin Smith, The Great Witness Show. The New Adventure series is. I'm Dean Bell here with Dean Kevin from the UK, and he's going to have at least a couple of experiences here for us to listen to and comment on and learn from to become more aware. Hello, Kevin.
In this real side experience, it seemed there was to be some event set to take place in humanity's overall collective experience. So again, we would construe it as a future view, or rather, it was agreements and decisions as they currently stand that take the moments they do to filter through to the physical and go through the cause and effect decided mechanics. Decided mechanics that dictate that, unlike in reality, where everything is instantly what it is, where decisions and agreement are the instantaneous effects of themselves, that instead the consciousness overall has rather been constructed that events move in a sequence, that these instantaneous thoughts, ideas and agreements are processed into a simulated rollout with the additional restrictions and limitations agreed to through the consciousness. So a house, for example, is not instantly so as we imagine it to be, although in reality this would be the case on the real side of life. But the consciousness has decided as to the laborious means by which only houses can be made, the construction of it, the materials, the illusion of time required, being all the individual idea causes that effect the outcomes that culminate in the completion of our house. And yet, were the consciousness stepped aside from, and one were able to not be resigned to its limitation, so would anything we do on the physical be equally as unrestricted, just as it is on the real side. And yet, were the consciousness stepped aside from, and one were able to not be resigned to its limitation, so would anything we do on the physical be equally as unrestricted, just as it is on the real side. And this has been the case, where you had the means of building structures from the past, so-called, where they would levitate the blocks, etc., with the technology or with the abilities through the ethereal, though evidently they still had decided through the consciousness that blocks were required, material needed to be gathered, but a step further, and it could equally have been so that a building could just manifest on the physical. When you're dealing with collectively shared experiences, it is the collective consciousness that holds the limitations. But even in a consciousness as it is today, an individual still could perform what seems to be feats of magic. A part of the collective consciousness he would be, but anyone can learn to bypass the restrictions of the consciousness if they so chose. And such an individual then, to have his creational manipulations feature in the experiences of others, that they might say benefit from instant house manifestation, simply requires agreement on their parts to the idea of the talented house manifesting individual. Agree with an individual, you agree to all they comprise of, their complete consciousness package of ideas, everything from their decided attitudes, personality, inclinations, intents, and all the affiliations and attachments they have with others through their own agreements, that these affiliated individuals can then feature in your experience also. So it's like you download all these ideas that make up another's consciousness into your simulated game, then effectively you have agreed to experience all these ideas in all the forms they take, and so your talented, creationally manipulating house builder can feature in your experience, or indeed the experiences of all those who do extend agreement to such an individual, and then, as per the nature of the ideas of the consciousness of the miraculous house manifester, you experience everything you bought and paid for effectively. As this is the nature of creation, everything can be broken down into ideas, and should you agree with any idea and take it on, incorporate it into your simulation, you experience exactly what the idea translates as. Then you have to deal with the effects, whatever they may be. Agree to let a monster into your house, for example, and don't be surprised when it acts monstrously, as is the nature of its consciousness, and you had after all decided to agree to it. Thus you chose to experience its monstrous activities. But as I was saying, future views can never be a done deal as we see them on the real side, as they must go through the processor that is cause and effect, through the consciousness limitations that delay the ideas from a physical level actuality, until eventually, if the agreement is maintained, will they feature on the physical. So as agreements change and fluctuate, so must the effects of the ideas agreed to, but some details remain consistent amidst the variables. The vaccination rollout, for example, is so ingrained and agreed to that it is a happening on the physical level and will continue to be so. But then other nefarious schemes and plots of the dark forces, although seen on the real side, remain rather stuck there, as they haven't the agreements to quite bring them through. But the overall agreement through the consciousness is to control, and so that foundation base allows the controllers to not only feature in the experience of all, but to feature in controlling ways, exactly as the ideas of the dark force consciousness would be constructed, that are then agreed to and hence experienced. You bring in a controlling, inclined, attitude-driven warmongerer into your experience, and he or she does just as their decided programming of the consciousness dictates. They control and warmonger. But despite the controllers not getting all their schemes through, they can keep trying different avenues, different marketed ploys for agreement. And through their subconscious impacting subliminals, where they can nestle ideas just as effectively, which is akin to agreement, and the effects must follow as surely as if we had consciously agreed to any idea. When it comes to uncontrolled variables that the dark forces would rather not have a feature in humanity's collective experience, that which would perhaps loosen the shackles of their human slaves, that which affords a wake-up as to the controlling experience humanity shares, that which might cultivate the intent for humanity to become more aware, and so agreement is retracted from each individual that steps from the dark force designed consciousness agreements that allows for the overall controlled simulation. These uncontrolled variables can be other alien factors, other beings, and the circumstances and situations they may bring to the table. But again, it all requires agreement among all those that are involved for it to feature in a collective simulated physical level reality. And as the dark forces have the agreements already extended to them, it's more likely they can pull off their dark plots and destructive agendas than the more beneficial situations that make sense with life and are real guide-backed, being able to feature physical level experience-wise. Nevertheless, as things continue on, as the control becomes more apparent, as the wake-up builds momentum, as it surely must, in the face of the blatant controlling systems, so will agreement fluctuate, even though subconsciously the agreements to control are maintained, but it is a step. First, the surface conscious realization and awareness of the situation, then through awareness can individuals then move from the agreement of the consciousness, which would include the subconscious. Then things are rather up in the air, and it's anybody's guess what will happen as a result, what the simulated outcomes will be, as agreement swings back and forth, and the controllers begin to have more and more the agreements from the masses retracted. I would find myself in a future setting of Earth, made apparent not so much by anything of the design of the physical level that suggested the future. Everything appeared relatively the same, so we might presume it wasn't so far into the simulated overall human experience effects that are to come, more based on how the control of humanity had moved along. Was it an indication of the future? And the virus pandemic does seem to be the foundation of the shaping of humanity's experience in regards to how consciousness agreement and the experience that effects from it is altered in response to the dark forces' pandemic creation. For yes, in this real side experience, there were vaccine checkpoints everywhere, huge restrictions in travel, even more so than currently, greater infringement on free will, armed militia patrolling everywhere, which in this future view had become an acceptable standard. As I said before, there are three means of real side experiencing. One is to simply observe, to stand in the nowness of the real awareness, a position where all agreements through the consciousness are placed aside and nothing of the simulator, idea-wise, is agreed to. For if we agree with any idea, or the ideas that are the consciousness, we place our awareness in the simulated effects and are rather embroiled in it, where we can directly interact personal self-idea to personal self-idea with others, but also be attacked and so forth, with the real awareness that we are, being this one overall awareness, an awareness that animates through all consciousness and the simulation effected from it. So from the real awareness position do we have the complete view of everything in creation, and the real awareness then can select what makes sense with life in each moment that the personal self will be shown, like watching a movie without being involved in it. The second way is the locating of the simulated situation, the real awareness, the guides, life wish to show us. Then if we agree with the ideas of that which we are shown, so we feature as a simulated idea in the effects, a simulated idea that others in the experience now can perceive and relate to. This, of course, is a necessity when approaching and seeking agreement from the personal simulated selves of beings that have as not yet made their real awareness connection. And yes, we could engage them, real awareness, being to being, but it's the personal self that must first decide to connect with the real awareness that it actually is. So it is the personal selves we try get the attention of, and to extend them the opportunity of the ears. And we can only do that on the personal simulated side, as such individuals haven't made the connection to their real awareness, so nothing real awareness-wise can be shown to it, including any being-to-being real awareness to real awareness interactions in whatever way that is conveyed to each personal self. And the third is a total immersion into the personal self-consciousness of another, that during such experiences we consider that we are that individual, and in reality we are all personal self-individuals, as we are this one overall awareness that animates through all consciousness. And so I would be engaging with this future view. For a future view, we may call it, simply because it hasn't processed through to the effects on the physical. But all that we see on the real side is just as much a simulated actuality. These future so-called views are what are happening now as other dimensions, and it's just a case of agreement as to if they become so on the physical. So for those we see in these simulated future views, for them what is transpiring is actually taking place, although likely with most being unconscious and one-dimensional, they won't be aware of the multi-dimensional nature of themselves and how their agreements and decisions, their thoughts and emotions, spin off into endless dimensional real side happenings that anyone can enter into and engage with. So really, an individual's overall intent, their agreements, etc., play out automatically in response throughout multi-dimensional simulated creation. I would find myself in a large building that led to a transportation system, a kind of underground train setup. Interestingly, I would see a number of very curious body forms that seemed unnoticed among the typical humans. They looked rather demonic, with completely black eyes and very pale skin. I had the impression that some were indeed demons and some were vampires. They would seem to notice me, unlike the masses of humanity in their usual automatic, unconscious pilot modes of being, as the dark forces or expressions of them tend to be a little more aware, alert, attentive, and conscious of the multi-dimensionality of themselves, more so than humans. They certainly have a tendency to notice when those not completely in agreement to the dark forces controlled, designed simulator consciousness step into any of their simulated real side situations, wherever and whatever they might be. It's almost a little like in the Matrix movie, when those with the ability could study all the coding that represented all those within the matrix, and any aberration, anything that wasn't within the parameters the controllers had set, would then become apparent. For of course, behavior and action will be based on the consciousness, and as the controllers have managed and designed the overall consciousness, so must the general behavior be in accordance with their design, typical, predictable, and routine. And so anyone becoming more aware would be stepping outside of their routine, overall dark force fashioned consciousness, and so would be exhibiting the sort of action and behavior suggesting such. And so, as you go about your awareness process on the real side, you are easily noticed, unless you remain aside from the simulation and just observe from the real awareness, or maybe try a little trickery of your own, disguises or subterfuge to fool the ever-watching controllers. These vampires and demons didn't seem moved to cause me harm, though my impressions through the real awareness discerned their ill intent. And yes, these body forms are present in humanity's experience on the physical, not just the real side, but generally stay hidden. But maybe they perhaps make themselves known more so as things progress. But then the fact no human seemed to notice the monsters in their midst suggests they were present, yes, but still not apparent to the average one-dimensional human. Having a little trouble with transportation due to the strictness of the situation, and I suppose I could have simply manifested the documents and vaccination evidence, etc., but instead I just relocated myself, the real awareness withdrawing from this simulated scene and finding another, the one I was attempting to reach, not going through unnecessary simulation of playing within the restriction of the scene. My view now was of an open area, the location unknown. There were masses of humans everywhere, and as they all pointed and gasped, so would a gigantic being begin to walk through the scene. I can't really describe its appearance. Humanoid, but nothing my personal self had references for to determine it by. It was miles in height, and seemed to be holding in its hands a large sphere that was shimmering, glowing, and bathed in swirling light. The sphere would have been large also, considering the size of the being that held it. For this being, the sphere would have been the size of, say, one of those extra large inflatable balls you see at the seaside. So it must have been a considerable size in comparison to the average human. Not only was this being fully visible to all of humanity, but this seemed a global knowing that the human species in its entirety knew of this happening, and indeed this being seemed to walk the earth, though caused no damage whatsoever, as though it were somewhat ethereal in its body form, like a ghost, though a visible one. And not only was it visible to all, and indeed ensured that it was so as it walked the globe, but the intention of it was also seemingly known to humanity by and large. This information wasn't known to my personal self, but the real awareness impressions filled me in on the details of this being's intentions. That it was a being of making sense with life inclinations. That which it was doing was a benefit, awareness speaking, a being backed by the real guides, and this curious globe was to be eventually placed at a certain location, though the exact location I never determined or remembered on waking. And as it would eventually place the globe, so this globe would present as a kind of doorway to another dimension or place in creation, as though an alternative option for all humanity, regardless of how aware they are, or even if they have no awareness or interest in becoming aware whatsoever. Because, as I said, all humanity could see this being, all humanity knew of the purpose for its presence, and knew of the opportunity of what was in fact a means of extrication from the severely controlled situation that humanity's collective experience had become. So agreements had facilitated the presence of this being, and regardless of anyone's awareness, it was then the decision of each human individual to take this option to relocate to presumably a better position, an arranged offer extended to every human by the guides that this giant being operated on behalf of. The scene switched, and it seems as though now I was on assignment with others to engage with humans throughout the real side, and almost as though prepare them for this happening. Garnering agreement, therefore, that this event, what would be a beneficial opportunity for all humans, can take place, as evidently the way things are going, this world is looking rather dire and deteriorating rapidly. And yes, many humans are unconscious and have no interest in becoming more aware, and yet the billions of slaves generally are just wanting to get on with whatever lives they have decided, going through their process of creation at a pace of their choosing. And such a situation as we are in, and that is yet to come, is yes, based on agreement, but if other options can be made available, even if the vast majority still have no interest in their awareness becoming, then surely it makes sense that such relocation efforts can be executed. For with such happenings, with giant beings walking the earth, with everyone seemingly knowing of the globe it carried as a dimensional portal to a better position in creation, this would at least serve as an additional wake-up to shake the unconscious masses from their self-convinced, limited considerations, and snapping people out of their routine consciousness by showing them something new, especially something of this nature, that will surely kick-start something, at the very least have them considering something else than what they have been for the longest time. And so, where this group and I were on assignment gathering agreement for this possibility, this would be then simulated situations prior to this future view where the event actually took place. For everything starts on the real side. Agreement is secured there, and then filters through to the physical, if indeed the agreements are successfully gleaned, and generally we were extending the overall opportunity of the ears to all that we encountered, explaining creation, the controllers, cause and effect, etc., with the additional agreement seeking for this potential human relocation possibility. I wouldn't see all the individuals that I engaged with, as that would be a little personal self-overwhelming visually, but would be shown a number of encounters, and my impressions were that our efforts were extensive and far-reaching. The scene would switch, and perhaps what I was witnessing now were the dark forces' counter-efforts to nullify agreements that my group and I had been attempting to secure. What better way can there be to derail the beneficial making sense with life efforts than through fear tactics? Get the masses to fear the consequences for insurrection, for daring to move against their agreements that have for the longest time been extended to the controllers. And again, everything starts on the real side. As we extend the opportunity of the ears, promote the real guides, and seek agreement to the various beneficial efforts, that which is planted will filter through to the physical. But if the dark forces also unleash their fear-based operations in response to it, this again must taint our efforts, and the fear associated with stepping up and agreeing beneficially with life will impact the extent to which we can successfully gain the agreements. And although with the unconscious unaware, what happens in the other dimensional areas of themselves they will not consciously be aware of, it all impacts and will dictate their behaviour and what they will agree to or not. They may have the urge to step up and become more aware through the efforts of the new friends on the real side, but they may have reluctance through an illogical fear of doing so, illogical from their limited perspective, but that which was due to the dark forces' fear-based efforts on the real side. In the simulated expression of this fear-inducing, it was as though the dark force agents were driving huge mechanical contraptions that were mowing down all the humans, those that were very likely the ones we had engaged with in our own agreement-garnering operations. These mechanical vehicles also would hose the frightened masses with fire, setting them ablaze. For again, as the consciousness overall is infused with agreements to the dark force controllers and their overall intent and decided ways of being, so will those who haven't connected with the real awareness still be sat in the consciousness, and thus agreement with it will allow at any moment the ability of the dark forces to enter their simulated experience and do what they do, control, and in this case, spread fear to put off the humans we had approached from the opportunity we had extended them and the agreements to certain potential overall human species options. And again, assistance can only be ventured according to the agreement parameters of an individual, and with those completely locked into the consciousness generally, even though we had planted the seed of the ears that this could change in short order as it filters through to the physical, personal self. Until that happens, they are beyond assistance, as their agreement with a consciousness that is programmed into a complete acquiescence to the controllers and their power over them is absolute. So we can't in any way bypass their free will decision to experience such situations. Despite how horrendous they may be, they have in actuality decided to experience such, even though consciously they won't realize this, as the agreements to the controllers overwhelmingly are subconsciously based. There was a brief scene where a group and I were then in an underground area and seemingly unearthing ancient artifacts and old books of a kind that had been buried and forgotten wherever in the simulator we may have been. And these artifacts and tomes contained certain key information that may be instrumental and essential for events to come, as were my impressions, though I couldn't determine the particulars. Of course, the real awareness is through everything and can access everything, no matter how hidden or forgotten, and so, if anything might prove to be of benefit, that might be of assistance on the simulated creational side, then these things will be located and brought to light. And perhaps this was an indication of the possibility of unearthing such things that may assist on the physical level in whatever ways that might be. Who knows what these ancient tomes may contain? For the great libraries, such as in Alexandria, were destroyed, and contained much by way of information recorded by the Tartarians and the Gnostics, and what was lost could be very useful in current circumstances as we try to survive in a rapidly deteriorating world. So this could hint at a physical level discovery, or just be the group and I accessing the information, finding these ancient tomes and artifacts on the real side, but either way, the information they contain, or the functions of the artifacts, may become known and applied.
You talked about downloading. Well, you have this recurring theme about people, when you agree to somebody or, with them, you're downloading kind of your whole consciousness comes with it. With the whole package comes with somebody. So with the real guides too, if we agree to them, then in essence, we're kind of like linked to them, but it's our job to recognize what they're about. It doesn't just come automatically, especially since they're outside of creation, you could say. So, and then Dwayne often talks about our life's basically over already here. I mean, it's finished already. So what you have right now at this point is what you have, basically your awareness. Just something to consider anyway. It's all about the awareness. And then you talked about the personal views, and I recommend a movie called The Cobbler with Adam Sandler. If you haven't seen that, it's an interesting movie about cobbler. That he's a cobbler. He inherited his father's business, who inherited his father's business, and they have this secret. And basically, he found out unknowingly, but he did find out where if you there's this machine down in the basement. It's a stitching machine, like a sewing machine that stitches the soles of the shoes. And if you use that machine on shoes, people's shoes that come in, and put the shoes on, you become the person. So he has fun with becoming a black man, a woman, transvestite, because he puts on their shoes and then he becomes them. So he has the personal view of them. And he gets into some kind of scrappy situations because of that. But he has fun, he has his adventures, but it's just something that's And then he finds out later on, this is a spoiler, that his father had disappeared. But he finds out his father is the barber next door to the shop to his, and he's taken on a role as a barber. He put on somebody else's shoes so he can watch his son and do certain things that he couldn't have if he was still around. So anyway, The Cobbler is a good, pretty fun movie to see how we can take on. It's kind of an example of how we reincarnate into different personal viewpoints, and this movie kind of exemplifies that. And then you talked about the future views. The future views that we get, they have to go, or do have to go through cause and effect, and people's free will and agreements. So that's always there. But you're getting all these, it's cool, you're getting all this stuff about what's possibly to be and what. So it's a warning to people listening here that pay attention, do something for yourselves, make decisions that make sense instead of agreeing to certain things that don't make sense. Do your research, just pay attention. It's just to your benefit to pay attention nowadays. It's really getting to that point where the tyranny, etc., is coming down on us, and we have to be alert with the decisions we make. Tim, do you have a comment or two or three?
I was just thinking about all the hidden secrets, things that are unknown. I think of things like there's a place called the Hall of Luxor under the Great Pyramid, where sounds like all the treasures of maybe not only this world, but who knows how many other worlds in the physical are there still. So those that had some kind of intent to create that structure and stash that stuff sure seem to have done a good job, man. Doesn't seem to still know of or have got to places that it's just like the way our consciousness is. If it's just plain black, we don't know this or that or the other thing, and then we get a little light from however life sheds it to oh, now we know something that we didn't know before. There was no such thing aware of anything about. Well, anyway, I just think that so much is not revealed. We see what is revealed, but guess that goes on forever.
Yeah, it's more than we don't know than we know, and more we're not aware of than we're aware of. And most people don't take that viewpoint. They think they know it, think they're educated or they're experienced, and they take on this viewpoint of self-conviction that they know certain things. And when presented with stuff, that could be possibilities that they don't know outside their range of knowingness, well, most people don't want to go there. And that's a challenge we have with helping people to become more aware. They don't want to, and leave them be. They don't want to. Those that do, that are sincere, we're here for them to help them see further than their personal self. Okay, Kevin.
This was a short, real-side experience, as I was afforded a view of a situation that seemed to centre around the necessity of infiltrating a government facility and either shutting it down, destroying it, or taking it over. The facility in question contained some extremely virulent bioweapon of some hazardous type or variety. I would not be participating in this mission, but more having various views regarding it. My awareness would be lingering around a large conference table where discussion and strategy regarding this mission was being determined. It looked rather like a military operation, and very often real guide-backed operations on the real side that make sense with the whole of life often present in this way, with the real guides in fact assuming the forms and attire of generals and admirals and so forth. The rank and position of the individuals in such experiences as these that present as militarized operations denote more awareness and recognition. So naturally, Dwayne and the guides assume the positions as the top brass, and more often is the case that me and the various other new friends involved are privates, as though fresh out of a boot camp. Very often, too, the destroying of dark force buildings, facilities, and such represents the guides and the aware individuals eradicating and nullifying the ideas that have not as yet manifested through to the physical. Everything starts on the real side as imagination, then formulated into literal ideas. The ideas then which require agreement to be so on the physical, and it is at the point of idea conception on the real side that the guides and those agreeing to participate in such can nullify these ideas at their source. Although this wasn't my impression here, it was more a case of a personal self-creational military entanglements, of jostling for control that is always the case between control-intended individuals that have no awareness and can't see beyond themselves and the limited creational simulation they effect. It was as though one dark force controlling faction was rather at odds with the ideas of another, that one group intended the release of some bio-weapon, but the other did not, though both sides, as it were, overall, represented control. Two individuals seemed key assets in this infiltration. Two men. One was a black, the other I don't recall any details regarding his appearance, but both were considered top-tier agents and generally utilized for all manner of clandestine operations and missions like James Bond characters. I would never see what transpired if there was a successful disarming or shutting down of this dangerous facility, but it does reveal the squabbling for control that exists in creation between dark force individuals and factions, and maybe it's even possible that one faction of the dark forces who intended this shutting down of this facility may even have been motivated to act on behalf of the real guides. Maybe we see further hints of more and more individuals deciding to wake up as they realize the impending simulator implosion, especially the dark forces, who are more able to see this potential cataclysmic simulator situation as opposed to the masses they have enslaved, who are so rigidly locked into their controlled agreements they can see nothing of anything much beyond the limitation of their controlled and agreed to confinement, and oblivious of the simulator's deterioration. As such, we see dark force characters stepping up also, and assisting in the various ways they decide, a long process for them granted, considering what they have created and gleaned mass agreement for, but nevertheless they are trapped in the effects also, and are rather panic-stricken and fearful of what they too will be caught up in. And for some dark force characters, leverage can be brought to bear. Assist the guides, or into the phantom zone you go. Not a punishment, but a position they have decided on based on the choices they have made. I did have at one point a seat in a large plane, in the company of the faction of dark forces that wished the facility shut down, although they could not see me. This was the plane that would deliver the two agents to a specific location, where they would then be deployed to carry out their mission, and it was as though I was marking the progress of the unfolding situation, accompanying the various individuals involved, listening in on key moments of dialogue which allowed understanding of what was transpiring, and I imagine I may well follow the infiltration attempt of the two agents with my awareness view, but the experience would end there.
Well, the bad guys, yeah, I mean, either way, you're screwed in a way. But because if you do turn, if the bad guys turn, they're going to be, targeted by, they're not going to want you to leave if you're a bad guy, but you're going to go anyway. You're not going to survive it anyway. So it's best to take a stance, to, do something now for your own benefit and survival, even though it may mean dangerous situation. And then you're better off, because you got yourself some momentum. Your decision has gained you at least some assistance from those, that see that you're trying at least to do better for yourself. Life sees you always. It's watching. Life watches us to see what we do, and those that are sincere, wanting to wake up, life will respond to that. Doesn't mean it's going to be easy or not challenging, or won't be pain, but at least you're on your way, rather than be on your way to your demise or the phantom zone, like Kevin mentioned. So. And like Kevin mentioned, it's not like a threat. It's just a warning, you could say, that you could do better. People can do better for themselves. It's all about your decision to do so. Very, very simple. And then life will show you if you pay attention. Anything else that you want to add, Kevin?
Yeah, not really. Just to reiterate the fact that this phantom zone situation is simply what the individuals have decided for themselves, because we always are the effect of what we decide, and our experience then rolls out in accordance. So if you find yourself in the phantom zone, it's not because some authority has placed you there. It's simply that is the effect of what you have been decided. And if you decide along the most abrasive, controlling and restricting of awareness lines that you possibly can, ultimately that will be, you will experience the effects of that, which expresses in that way in you finding yourself in the phantom zone. Because just like people can find themselves placed in the lower astral, which again would reflect their abrasiveness of their decided consciousness, being the most forbidding area in the simulator. So one step beyond that be them finding themselves in the phantom zone. So, and it's very similar to the Lords of Karma. Again, they're not dictating where you go. They're simply presenting that which you have decided for yourselves based on your decisions and choices and agreements. And so that's really the main takeaway from everything, really, that you are always the decider of your experience, and everything that happens in your simulation, regardless of your life position or circumstances, is really what you have decided. And so really that then makes people move more into a position where they have to take more responsibility for themselves, not be pointing fingers at other people and saying and thinking they're the victim of circumstances or uncontrolled variables. And even the situations with the controllers or any individual imposing on their simulation, again, is through agreement that can be so. In other words, regardless of how the agreements were secured, they have in fact decided to experience that. And really at the end of the day, all experience is designed for one purpose, regardless of how adverse it may seem, and that is as an overall comparison to recognise the is by. And so I will just finish with that, just to reiterate that we are always the deciders. And as it was in that experience where I said where the guides can nullify ideas at their inception point before they come through to the physical. Again, what that would be is that they're not denying individuals the ability to utilize their free will, because people can decide whatever they want. But once again, because of what these characters have decided, so the effects can be managed creatively. And one of the ways they can be creatively managed is the guides coming in and nullifying their creations at their inception point, which would in a way be similar to going into the phantom zone, because in the phantom zone you can't create anything, and so that is a complete nullifying of your ability to create. And so the nullifying of specific ideas is almost a mini microcosmic version of being placed in the phantom zone, again according to what the controllers have decided, and again allowing then the guides to creatively manage the effects in such ways that we can go onto the real side and nullify these ideas at their inception point. So I'll just add that.
Thanks. And it may be a gift to go into the phantom zone, or what you're saying there, how you're saying it, rather than go through endless suffering and torture and pain for the effects that you created. Like with the Queen of Orion, where she was so far gone that better just to start over than trying to figure out how to get back to some kind of life, in creation.
I always find it fascinating as well, as Dwayne says, that even people who go into the phantom zone, or even if individuals who get caught in a simulator implosion, when they come into the next simulator or come out of the phantom zone, it's almost as though they've clung on to the essence of their overall consciousness, however that generally was. And so even with a completely new simulator, as consciousness is completely new and their awareness gets placed in it, and it has no ideas at all that have been inserted in it at that point, it's still as though they cling on to the essence of what they were previously, and that almost starts them, or at least is a motivating factor in how the consciousness then develops again. And so you can have individuals who are the worst of the tyrants in one simulator getting caught up in the implosion, having to start a new simulator, but there's still some essence of their controlling inclinations and proclivities that they cling to, which then motivates them to go along those lines again. And it's quite interesting how even across simulators, from implosions to reconstitutions of them, people will still cling on to these ideas in some form or another. It's quite incredible, really.
Less work for the lords of karma. They don't have to give them the addy karma, to start off with. They've already carried with them proclivities from the past.
Yeah, because that's how Dwayne says how the simulators began. That everybody, that that they had to have some karma to go in with in order to kickstart some effect that would then snowball and bring everyone through the various consciousness lines that then they decided on the back of that. Otherwise, how would anything begin? If they have to have something, there has to be some effect that you walk into, and you can only walk into some effect if there is something in the consciousness which has affected it. So it's almost as I think Dwayne said that the years actually, in a sense, gives every individual a little karmic gift, a little karmic something that kickstarts their process. And I always looked at it as though it's almost as though the is actually gives the proclivity to be more the ill-intended, or to be the opposite, and almost as though, and then that sort of differentiates through all the animal species, and you can see it going into more the predatory lines, and then more into the more docile prey animal lines, which then will evolve because of the consciousness of those type of animals will become then the controllers and the enslaved. All the more predatory animals sort of have more the inclination to become the reptilian controllers and body types, and it's almost like the more docile prey animals then become more the enslaved humans and other body types, and then they're all their simulation all converges, and they all interact in the controlling and controlled ways that they do. It all comes together, and everyone comes to the final point at the end of a simulator in the Iron Epoch, where the idea is then for everybody to suddenly realise that regardless of what they have been, controllers or controlled alike, that at this point everybody, no matter what they've done, has the opportunity to step aside from the consciousness as they have constructed it, and everybody has the opportunity to recognise the is, and just as long as they can put down and put aside that personal self however they have constructed it, and not be too hung up on whatever it is they have decided as to their general experience. So like Dwayne says, even the worst controller in the universe, they are still a real awareness being that is ultimately trying to recognise the is that it is a part of. And so by such a token, it's foolish for people to cling on to the fact that whatever they've done defines them, whereas that really is just references. Ultimately, like any experience, allows recognition of the is. And so this is the point and the time in the simulator's history to put all that stuff aside and to do it, basically.
Very good. Let's do it. Let's do it. You. Tim?
You.
And Kevin.
You.